Images of glory in my mind at enlistment. Overhead a flapping red, white, and blue, filling the distance. A grand divide between myself and conscientious convictions or belief systems that stop people from killing over religion. I was young and I was out of options in my mind. It was supposed to be fun, my obligations ill-defined. I'd be the one to take charge with a gun back in my mind. Without college or riches, no dreams are realized. Well, I never have the ladder of the Marines to get me the first. Ain't nothing better than dress blues are the ones spitting this verse. You see the world paying to the GI Bill, fat in the purse. My recruiter made it sound simple, a play get well rehearsed. Forever cursed to the ones who get young innocent signatures under the guise of from God and country their honor diminishes. Greed built a standing army when against the founders' wishes. Now free democracy conducts war games and peacekeeping missions. Ironic hypocrisy.
Falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
I scored high in my entrance exams on ASVAB and chose the 0341 with guaranteed Hawaii track. Graduated basic, now MOS school's where I'm at. A mortar man with a 35-pound gun on my back. Plus my rifle 8 pounds, 65-pound pack. I'm 18, weigh a $195 and feel jack. 108 pounds on my back, a boot marine and Cadillacs. A short 20-mile hump, 4 quarts in my flat. After 7 miles, swearing in my right foot crack. I'm an E1, tell my sergeant I think it snapped. He's an E5, shouts private, don't beat me crap. You got 2 feet, compensate and don't fall back. After 4 more miles, my left foot joins in the act. Only 9 more to go, I walked through all, that's a fact. 1 certificate for intestinal fortitude, not having shat. And 3 months healing, lost Hawaii to Guantanamo, rap.
Sergeant de Victoire, who I met in 6th grade. Dress greens, patent lover, and a high top fade. My mind was made up, I couldn't wait to grow up so I could sign up, man up, and stop the corrupt. A champion for God and country. Just wait till they get a load of me, an unstoppable PFC. Private first class, polished brass. I wanted to kill all the black pajamas that were hiding in the grass. But with no war in sight, my plight to fight never took flight. So I trained during the day and got drunk at night. Set my sights on all types of glory. Fast forward to Afghanistan, totally different story. IEDs, enemies, no front line to see. 80 pounds of gear in the desert, I could hardly breathe. Bloodstained fatigues, very many colleagues sent home to the VA to live with PTSD. Every day recruiters go to inner cities and ask for
falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
I never let my children volunteer for the military to make the same mistakes as I did these days could be deadly. If they're drafted with dodging, my go back, stay ready. I support Manning and Snowden. You know where this country's heading. Global tyrant, hegemonic, bully police force, demonic practice, virgin sacrifice, bloodlust. Oil wars valuing corporations over people. This is sick worship by objects and pure evil. Material desires get more attention than spiritual. Benefits are based on profits, complaints aren't given view. Arms manufacture, supply both sides of conflicts. Do you have a problem with any of these statements or doubt their truth? I'm a father and a veteran, and I stand for peace. Julian Assange against our commanders-in-chief. But it's hard to be better when daily demands compete. I'm not ignoring the slaughter, I'm just trying to eat like you.
Falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
Peace, peace, and plenty, peace and power. Thank you for joining us today on this 27th day of January 2021. We are so happy that you have chosen to spend your time with us. There's a lot of places you could be. It's a Wednesday. There's a lot of people online. There's a lot of information. It's an interesting time in our country. We got Mike here in the house. What's going on, Mike? How you doing?
Hello, thanks for having me. Glad to be here once again. Going to be
Always
a good
love-
show with Mr. Fletcher here today.
Always love being with you, brother. We have a transition of power that went through peacefully, despite a failed insurrection from disgruntled 70 million disgruntled Americans. A few thousand we know stormed the Capitol a few weeks ago, and tried to overthrow the country that they, with no plan of where to go, the country that they've been talking so much love for over the past year, and how the righteous rebellions for Black lives and indigenous lives need to stand down and respect blue lives. And then these people go out and kill 5 people and beat police officers. One police officer died and beat them with flags. So we see the irony for what it is right now. And we have a transition happening where we have, finally, in my lifetime, I think it might be the first time ever, a democratically controlled Senate, Congress, and executive chamber. So let's see if things can get moved forward and people can stop bickering and stop fighting. Today, we have a long-time activist, long-time labor union organizer and activist in the peace movement with us to analyze what's going on, to tell us what he sees from his perspective, where we need to go as veterans, what we can do as activists, as people in this movement, as interested people in moving our country forward to a better place. Bill Fletcher Jr. is on the advisory board of Veterans for Peace. He's a longtime labor and racial justice and international activist. Bill Fletcher is an editorial board member and columnist for blackcommentator.com and a senior scholar for the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. He is the co-author with Fernando Gapasin of Solidarity Divided, The Crisis in Organized Labor and a New Path Towards Social Justice. And he's also the author of They're Bankrupting Us and 20 Other Myths About Unions. I highly recommend you check out his work. He's very invested in the movement and in the labor movement and the intersections with veterans and peace organizing. And so it's a beautiful thing. And I'm happy to welcome Bill Fletcher to our live stream for the first time and get this conversation going. So is he ready to join us? Are we ready to bring him onto the screen?
Yeah, you want me to add him?
I think so. If he's ready to come in.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
There you are.
I've been ready.
Okay.
Am I ready? I was born ready.
You've been organizing since, I think you've been organizing since before either of us were born.
Quite possible. Since high school, since 15.
Since you were 15. So that is certainly since before either of us were here. And you've seen a lot in those years, a lot of changes in organized labor in this country and in the responses to labor, in the public's response to organized labor. I really don't know where to go in. I think what I would like is for you to introduce yourself to the people and tell the people a little bit about yourself. We'll bring you up onto the screen and give them your history and kind of in that, if you want, because it's such a big, you've been doing this for so long, kind of talk about where we are right now, in perspective to where you were at 15 when you started organizing, if you can, and then we got some questions for you as well. But
okay, well that's gonna be a mouthful, but let me do it like this. So I became radicalized when I was about 13. I became active when I was 15 in high school and have stayed active ever since. Student organizing, labor organizing, community organizing, doing a lot of writing, And so, like, I have a long history, and I don't want to bore people with it. But particularly since this is a show sponsored by people from Veterans for Peace, I wanted to say a little bit about how I got interested in the issue of veterans. So I grew up during the Vietnam War, and it was during the draft for most of the war. And, you could watch this stuff on television. It was the first time that people could actually watch a war on television. And the horrors of it and the stories from veterans returning home. But to a great extent, many of us didn't appreciate what veterans faced until well after the war, when there were discussions that started to emerge around what became known as post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the revelations around Agent Orange. And then, of course, our friends and loved ones who never returned. One of the things that happens in many of the wars the United States engages in is that they'll rally around the flag, they'll encourage all kinds of jingoism. The soldiers go off to war, they either die or come back shaken. And you have a society that really doesn't pay any attention to them. And in the late 70s, early 80s, that was something that really affected me in looking at Vietnam veterans. There was the beginning of these veteran centers that were starting to spring up around the country. And the story of the veterans, and particularly the story of Black veterans, was something that was only barely reaching the surface. It became clear that veterans were a disposable commodity as far as most of the society is concerned. Yeah, every so often, on Veterans Day or Memorial Day, they'll rally the flag and put some veterans on a car somewhere. But in terms of really taking care of people, I mean, it's like when the Iraq War when they were gearing up for the Iraq War, I was absolutely amazed that at the same time that Bush was lying us into the Iraq War, they were cutting veterans' benefits. I'm saying this doesn't make any sense. And then when I watch television and I see these ads to try to get contributions to various programs for disabled veterans, my wife and I asked the same question. Why is there a need for such programs? Why isn't it that the government is taking care of veterans? If people put their lives on the line, why should they have to be like raising extra money? Why is that even an issue? But it shows you the hypocrisy in this country. And that's something that really affected me and affected my consciousness. Now, unfortunately, and we saw this on January 6th, there's a segment of veterans who were very attracted to fascism. And I think it's going to be incredibly important for progressive veterans to out-organize these fascists. Because one thing that the fascists always target veterans, and progressives need to make sure that they don't get anywhere with it.
Okay, I'm gonna put this up on the screen because I see you stop there, and I felt like that was a palpable pause, right? You wanted a response?
Well, someone just wrote this ridiculous thing. They said they did not try to overthrow the country. The troublemakers were instigated by Antifa and BLM. So this is one of the times when facts matter. Again, I would say to the person that wrote in that you have no facts, none, zero, nada, that would substantiate that position. And that you might as well be talking about lizard people that are landing on Earth from some other place and making this argument. There is no factual basis for that argument. And what's even more interesting, to show you how idiotic it is for someone to make the argument that Antifa and BLM were behind this, is that the nutcases that were doing this coup attempt had themselves on video. And they were asking, why are we being arrested? As if like, what, white people don't get arrested when they break the law? I mean, you know, it's like, come on back down to earth now.
So people are really, I agree with you. And this is a safe space. If you make the comment, we're going to put the comment on the screen. We're not trying to put you on blast. We're trying to call you in. So it's true. What you just said is very true. They are on screen. They are on camera, being recorded, climbing the wall of the Capitol, breaking down doors, chasing police through hallways, chanting Trump. Clearly, the facts are there. There doesn't need to be an investigation. We clearly know that what they tried to do was was based on privilege and entitlement. What if it was a
and based on see, one of the things about the right wing in the United States is that you know, there's a comedian, George Wallace, black guy, who used to end his monologues by saying, "That's the way I see it, and that's the way it ought to be." That should be the slogan of the right wing, right? That facts don't matter, their opinion does. So if they want to say it, you know, that the earth is flat, their attitude is, well, that's my opinion. And you're right, that is your opinion. It's crazy. It's not based on any reality, but if you want to believe that, that's fine. So just get on a boat and go east or west, and let's see how flat the earth is, right? I mean, see, facts matter. And the clearly, this was a coup attempt. The people that were behind it were very clear. They have done all kinds of investigations already where they've gotten communications from these fascists where their intent was clear. So it's like, wake up and smell the coffee, please.
Do you see that comment? I believe that's exactly what you just said. I believe they were ordinary people, albeit deeply misguided, who were enabled by more powerful forces. Would you say?
Well, you know, here's the thing. Yes and no. You know, at some point, this is one of the things that really gets me going about white people, particularly white conservatives. They always talk about personal responsibility when it comes to us. Oh, you all have to assume more personal responsibility. But see, when they screw up, then it's like, oh, no, we got to investigate this. Oh, no, these were innocent people. No, they weren't innocent. These were people that knew. I've been down to the Capitol. I know something about the security. You don't walk right in there, right? You don't storm in there unless your intent was to take people out. I mean, let's stop playing games. If you're a fascist, just admit it, please. Just admit it. Stop the bullshit. Right? And just admit that your objective was to take out those elected officials. Don't try to play some sort of game to pretend that this was anything other than a coup attempt. And you see, the thing is, there's a history in the United States of these things. In 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina, there was a progressive coalition that was elected to run the city. And white supremacists, and you can look this up. Of course, for some of the fascists, the facts won't matter. So, but you can look it up. Anyone that is reasonable, the white supremacists decided that they didn't want these progressives, black and white, running the city. So what did they do? They launched an insurrection. It was a coup. They chased out of office the people who had been elected. They killed people. They drove at least 1,000 African Americans out of the city of Wilmington, and they replaced them with white supremacists. This is documented. The state of North Carolina did nothing. The federal government did nothing. I mean, this was the beginning of what we saw with Jim Crow. There's a history to this kind of stuff.
Thank you for bringing up Jim Crow. Like Reconstruction happens right after. I was telling my sons about Reconstruction today. Starts right after slavery ends. There's like a vacuum, a need for a place for all these skilled laborers to go. And there's starvation. So Reconstruction happens, and people are allowed to vote and take office, and then within 2 years, the change is very evident, to the point where I think Reconstruction only lasted about 17 years, and then the Jim Crow era begins, right? Like in
Yeah.
19
Around 1877. It was Reconstruction was sort of from 1865 to 1877. It really ends, and then there's a slow move, and in some places a fast move towards Jim Crow.
and the destruction of Black Wall Street. The history is very evident. So I know we
Right.
have people who want to deny the facts and deny the country that they live in was built on the hands, built by the labor of stolen Black bodies and built on stolen land. And that's a self-evident fact that can't really be denied. And even to this day, the major laborers in this country are migrant workers. We still, even in a health pandemic, rely on people who are mostly undocumented to farm the fields of this country and feed the country.
Isn't that ironic? I mean, you're absolutely right. But the other thing about it, man, is that there is extensive poverty in this country that goes way beyond issues of migrants. And this is what's so infuriating about the appeal of Trump to a segment of our population, that his administration oversaw a dramatic polarization of wealth that hasn't been seen since the 1920s, where the rich got much richer. It was a period when you started to see the spread of the opioid crisis, which, by the way, I would say we got to understand heroin crisis was the beginning of the opioid crisis, but no one would call it that. But when you had white people that started dying, then it became the opioid crisis. And white people are dying. And you have this situation of working people in this country. Their income is stagnating or declining. And many of them are looking for someone to blame. Other people are maybe not losing anything, but they're afraid of what might happen. And then on top of all of that, you've got this fear of the changing demographics of this country, that the country is becoming much more diverse, in my opinion, much more interesting. And so you got this, which is being played upon. And there's this fear. And that's what's really pathetic about right now, because the people that are being stomped on by the rich really need to be coming together to basically change the way that the system is operating. Instead, you got people believing the most nonsensical things, like I was saying before, and I wasn't joking, about lizard people.
When you said about lizard people, I know you're not joking, because that's the QAnon conspiracy. That's the belief, that there's like dwellers on inner Earth, right? Like there's and you got to give. I give credence to things, right? I'm like, I'm an artist, right? So I'm kind of a right brain. I'm a left brain person. I'm very creative, very like what if kind of, and I play with it and I say question reality. So what if you have lizard people living on inner Earth, and they come up on a regular basis, and UFOs are actually from inside the Earth, and they're coming through Antarctica, and that's why nobody can go to Antarctica, and what if all of that is true, and Hitler and the Nazi Party went and built underground bunkers, what if that is true? Does that then say, now we people who don't like the direction that the country is moving, the country's too progressive, we think it's going too far left, we need to band together and storm the Capitol? And as somebody is so fervently saying in the comments, that it wasn't truly an attempt, it was just It was just a small show of power, because had they wanted to, they could have really changed things with no plan. Does that, if there are lizard people on inner Earth, does that then say that the country should be overthrown by by these people?
Right.
Like, what is the argument, right?
Well, look, there's two things there. One is to the person that wrote in about if we had really wanted to take over, we could have. No, see, because the arrogance of the white folks, white fascists on January 6th was they didn't think they were going to be stopped. They were stunned that anyone was stopping them or trying to stop them. So, that's something to just flag. In the 1980s, there was I'm very much into science fiction, which you may or may not know. I'm a real Star Trek fan and everything else. So I claim my ancestry, I claim, is Klingon. So anyway, so for the in the 1980s, there was a television show series called V. And it basically was about these aliens that come in with these super spaceships, and they look like humans. But what it turns out is that they're actually lizards. So when I started hearing this lizard thing, I said, oh, I got it. So somebody was probably high, had been watching the show, and said, wow, I got this idea. The thing about conspiracy theories is that conspiracy theories are drawn from and are attractive to people who are feeling hopeless. Because conspiracy theories answer every question that's imaginable. And the reality is that in the real world, that's not possible. But a conspiracy theory will. It will show you all of these things and how they're all related. And ultimately, what it shows you is that there's actually nothing that can be done. That's one of the real dangers of conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories appeal to emotions, and they appeal to fears. And so the idea of the lizard people appeals to those who can't figure out why is it that we don't seem to have control over our lives anymore. There's got to be something. And the thing is that there's been a retreat from science from many of these people and looking for the easy explanations. And the problem is in many of these things, there's not an easy explanation. There may be a straightforward one, but it's not going to be easy. But the other part of it is that you then got to figure out what you're going to do. I mean, for example, so in 2017, Trump pushed through with his congressional minions this major tax overhaul that benefited 1% of the country. Now, what are we going to do about it? It's easy to not focus on that and instead to try to focus on lizard people. It's easy to start focusing on migrants. It's harder when you realize what we're up against, and then you start thinking about, well, what kind of strategy do we need in order to take this on?
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. You keep hitting the nail on the head. You keep hitting the nail right on the head. Like, it's easy to. Mike, I see you got a question. It's easy to like run away from it, and fear causes us to do that. And fear allows this paradigm to continue because we are locked in a fear paradigm. I speak on that all the time. This is a spiritual battle. You know what I'm saying? It's a physical world we live in. We are not just physical beings. We have a mentality. We have a spirituality. We have a physicality. And this war that we are in is definitely being played in our psyche. It's being played on our psyche. It is a war between good and evil being played out in our mind, and we live it out in this physical world. So what you are saying is 100% on point. And I'm gonna let Mike ask his question, but I got so much more to ask you.
Let's rock and roll
now to come back on our show at some point in the near future, because this is wonderful.
Thank you. There's a lot of threads here that I've wanted to go down. I'd like to add something, and then I've got a question. I think a lot of this conspiracy theory stuff, a lot of it is structurally anti-Semitic, and
Oh, yeah.
I think that it's kind of a miracle in a way that this all QAnon and Proud Boy stuff hasn't gone so explicitly anti-Semitic at this point. But I think that's something definitely that we need to keep our eyes open and watch out for. I think it probably will end up going that way. And so, and there's so many, all this conspiracy theory stuff. It's essentially related to the idea that capitalism is a fundamentally broken system, that we can't infinitely extract resources from a finite planet. And that creates a sort of psychosis. It creates a psychotic personality in people who believe that, because it just presents a fundamentally broken world. And then people, they get into this lie and they go deeper and deeper. They have to create more lies. I think Hitler called it the big lie. It was a propaganda tactic that Hitler created that creates this system where you just cover up lies with lies, and then you just end up with this, full anarchical type system. But so my question would be, so how do we treat it? There's got to be a variety of tactics. So I think maybe some ways we could treat it would be going down the road of, like democratic socialists, where we start to create more of a safety net for white people who are prone or culpable, or I don't know what the word is, prone to go down this fascist line of thinking. We've got to be able to rescue these people from going over the border, and then also we have to treat the fascists as well. We have to address them. So my question is, Bill, what do you think are like some of the variety of tactics that we can do to stop the fascist rise in the United States?
So a few things. So one, I'm glad you raised the issue of anti-Semitism, because it's often overlooked. That one of the things that the extreme right likes to do is play around with anti-Semitism. It's not necessarily as blatant as we saw in Nazi Germany, but there's certain terms, the Eastern elite, cosmopolitan, etc., as well as the naming of certain names like George Soros. It's all part of the same game that's been used for years. Fighting the fascists has to be done on multiple levels. So let me just start with this. Everybody that was involved in the coup attempt on the 6th needs to be in jail. One of the big mistakes after the Oklahoma City bombing was that, as you may remember, when the bombing took place, the immediate assumption was that it was Muslims or Arabs that had carried it out. So everybody had gotten a hatchet, was looking for them. Then all of a sudden they found it was 2 homegrown white boys that were behind this. And it's like, oh my God. Then the entire discussion shifted to, oh, we need to understand these guys. What made these veterans do something like this? How could they have been so extreme? What about their childhood? What do we need to understand about how they were thinking? None of what you would ask any of the terrorists that were involved in 9/11. Who gave a damn about the 9/11 terrorists and what their mama was like? So why the hell should we care about Timothy McVeigh's family, right? Or Terry Nichols? They were terrorists. You put them under the jail, right? So my attitude is, the people on January 6th, you put them under the jail, right? And it's like, there's no hand slapping. Anyone that wants to say, well, we didn't really intend to do that, the hell with it. Then you were a fool, right? And so you marched up there, threatened the cops, threatened the legislators, and now you want us to say, oops, it was a mistake. I didn't really mean to be there. I was just like putting on a show. I was just selling wolf tickets. You want to know about wolf tickets, you come to New York, right? It wasn't wolf tickets. It was a coup attempt. So people have to understand there's a price to be paid. You try to pull off a coup in many countries, there's a definite solution that takes place almost immediately if you fail, right? So that's one. Now, the bigger thing is that this country is crushing most of its people. And those of us that are progressive we understand that there's something really, really wrong with this, the way that the system operates. It is toxic. It is destroying the planet. It is destroying the environment. So we need to be building a movement that's taking that on. This is one of the reasons I think that the Green New Deal is so damn important, right? That we need to be really thinking about restructuring the economy, restructuring the way we do work in order to make sure that humanity makes it out of the 21st century, and not just humanity, but all these other species that are dying off, right? We got to do something about that. And that means that, at least in my opinion, because I'm a socialist, it's that capitalism is harmful to your health. And that's my slogan. And so therefore, we got to do something about it. So that's part of responding. The other thing that we have to do as part of our work is really ongoing education. In the United States, I like to say that in the United States, we actively oppose history and embrace myth. That like, we really don't want to deal with history. It's much easier to just deal with the way things are the way we want them to be, right? So let's not really talk about slavery. The Civil War wasn't really about slavery. It was about something else, right? Let's not really talk about the fact that the United States seized northern Mexico. You know, it's like, that's anti-American to talk about, right? Let's not really talk about how the United States killed at least 1 million Filipinos in the Filipino-American War of 1899 to 1910. You know, that's like uncomfortable. It makes us feel bad, right? Well, damn it, we got to feel bad because we got to understand that, you know, again, I go back to this thing, personal responsibility. If the conservatives want to say, y'all got to take responsibility, then I say to them, y'all got to take responsibility. You got to take responsibility for nearly annihilating Native Americans. You got to take responsibility for seizing northern Mexico. You got to take responsibility for enslaving people. You got to take personal responsibility for destroying the lives of working people so that they feel like they got to get high all the time or commit suicide. There's got to be responsibility. So we got to be aiming at the right target.
Mike, do you want to follow up? Because I want to follow up.
No, thank you. That was brilliant. Go ahead, Miles.
Those the people who went to the Capitol, who stormed the Capitol, they were empowered already, weren't they? Like, they were able to take the trip there during a health pandemic. They were able to take the time off, or they could afford it, you know, even though a lot of people haven't been working. They were armed. They were armed. I mean, there was one guy who had a couple dozen zip ties on his waist. That's not cheap. And there were people with weapons. Like, the trip there, the hotel stay, DC is not a cheap city. You know, these weren't, like, the myth is that poor white people support Trump. And could you speak to that? Like,
yeah,
you know,
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. After Trump was elected, there was this whole myth that poor white people had gotten together to bring him into office. No, it turned out to be rich white people and upper middle income white people, just like in the Tea Party, that had rallied around, not people that are suffering, by the way, but people that are worried about suffering. And they're worried about maybe being displaced by people of color. And those are the people that rallied to this. And it was interesting, in the 2016 election, they did surveys afterwards. And they found that people that highlighted the economy as their main concern tended to vote for Hillary Clinton. It was the people that highlighted terrorism, immigration as a major concern that tended to vote for Trump. In this last election, Trump's support was largely among people that were making more than $100,000, right? So it's like there's this myth that the poor white people are out there rallying around Trump. No, it's actually just as complicated as you identified. But the other thing, Miles, I want to say is this. For these people that say, well, you know, this was really just a protest and it's been exaggerated, I want you to think for a second. There were the estimate was under 1,000 people that stormed the Capitol. It was several hundred. So if several hundred Black people or Puerto Ricans or Chicanos or Native Americans, some of them armed, had stormed the Capitol, it would have made Tiananmen Square look like a picnic. They would have been picking up body parts. And anyone that doesn't believe this, then I encourage you to continue to believe in lizard people, because you're out of your mind, right? I mean, if you look at the history of the United States and you understand that when, one of the things I often like to say, man, is that if you want gun control in the United States, just arm Black people, right? And if Black people are armed, there'll be gun control within 5 minutes. And one of the examples, you may think I'm exaggerating, in the 1960s in California, when there were gun debates going on, Black Panther Party members walked through the streets of Sacramento with unarmed shotguns, and none other than Ronald Reagan, who was not known as a Bolshevik, started coming out talking about gun control. You see, so it's like, let's be clear. If Black folks had marched on the Capitol, I don't mean just like even doing a protest, but breaking through the lines, are you joking? I mean, there would have just been a absolute massacre. And this is one of the things, this was one of the things that I found in a very sick way funny, that when you started hearing some of these protesters say, well, wait a minute, I don't understand why I'm being arrested, because you're breaking the law, fool. Right? Why shouldn't you be arrested? If you're Black, you'd have a bullet in your head. I mean, so we've got to be talking to people about the way this country actually operates, and not let people live in this mythical world that all of the benefits and all of that is coming to people of color, and that there's something called white genocide and that white people are disappearing. It's just like, it's nuts.
It's not true. It's thank you for saying that. It's we started this show in response to the murder of George Floyd. We started this in solidarity with a nation and a world rising up for justice for Black lives and Indigenous lives. And the intersection between that happening, that this phenomena, and the military industrial complex is so evident to me. Like I see the intersection between police violence against people of color, poor people, Indigenous people, and the rise in the military industrial complex, and the US as the world's police force with over 800 bases around the world. I see the connection so evidently, like so it's so ready. It's right there in front of your face. It is like two Americas. It's truly like, if you're not a person of color, or if you're not from an inner city or an urban city center, or never had Black friends or people of person, you know what I'm saying? Then you could not know. You can grow up in this country, because still to this day, we're only 13% of the population. Black people in this country, 60 million people, 70 million people, something, 50 million people. So if you don't live in a city center, and you only watch your shows, and you only consume information from your bubble, you could not know. You could be in 2021, unfortunately, and be a person who says, I just can't see what they're saying is true.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I used to be a shipyard worker in Massachusetts, and I was living in Boston, and I would encounter white coworkers from the suburbs who had never, ever been in Boston. And they were like maybe 10 miles away. I mean, 10 miles, you could walk 10 miles, right? And they'd look at me and they'd say, you live in Boston? You know, as if I was like living on Devil's Island or something, right? And so we are a very segregated country. And so your point is absolutely, it's very well taken. And so what happens is that there's these myths and fears. That like, for example, one of the things that Trump did was stir up fears about MS-13 and that Salvadoran gang. Salvadoran gang that actually began in Los Angeles, but that's another story. So people that are not around any immigrants started like getting really nervous about, all these immigrants that are coming in, even though there's like no immigrants near them, and no immigrants from the global South. But the other thing, and I had to get this in, man, is that at the same time that people are talking about putting up a wall and stopping these immigrants and everything, you have an administration, the Trump administration, that never once talked about the criminal gang outfit organization that is the most feared by law enforcement. It's not MS-13. It's nobody from Mexico. It's not the Yakuza. It's not the triads. It's the Russian mafia. And we have to ask a question. I don't think Trump is a fool, exactly, but he is, he knows that there is a Russian mafia. So why did he mention the Russian mafia? And if he's worried about crime, then, and he thought that a wall could stop these migrants from Mexico who are allegedly bringing crime, well, then how do you stop the Russians from bringing crime? What, do you shoot down their planes, blow up their ships? What, do you shoot them when they're coming through passport control? I mean, this is the insanity about what's going on. The most dangerous criminal organization doesn't come from the global South. It comes from Russia. And not once did this administration point out the danger of the Russian mob. Why is that? Have a lapse? Early onset Alzheimer's? I mean, like, why?
Hey, Bill, I'm going to leave you on screen if I can and ask you to answer this question. There's a couple more that I want to throw at you, if I could.
Yeah.
How have people in power used racial division to break labor organizing? And what is the current racial makeup of the working class?
I love whoever posed this question.
That's our ED. That's Garrett, our executive director.
So there's a very long answer to that, Garrett, and I'm going to give you only a brief one. It started in the 1600s. When the settlers first came over here, to what became the 13 colonies, they had a problem. They had a workforce problem. They needed people to do the work. So they came into an area that was already occupied by people, the Indians. And they went to remove the Indians from the land, and in some cases enslaving them to do work, but that wasn't enough. So they started bringing over people from Europe, forcing them to come here. But that wasn't enough. They went to Africa and they started forcing Africans. It's like Africans did not volunteer to come to the 13 colonies. So they were brought over here originally as indentured servants and slaves, and then ultimately as slaves, period. All right, so you got all these people here doing this work, a small number of rich people, and these people that were doing work, they started realizing that they were getting screwed. And so they started rising up. And they rise up, and there are these rebellions throughout the 1600s against the rich. Excuse me, one of the most famous was Bacon's Rebellion. And so you have Africans and Europeans joining together to rebel against the rich. So the rich English realize under those circumstances that they got a problem, and so they implement what they had tested in Ireland after they took over Ireland in the 1500s. They set up a form of divide and conquer that's based on what they call race. Now, there's only one race on this planet. That's human beings. There's no other races. But the English and the Spanish and the Portuguese and other parts of the Western Hemisphere basically identified certain people as white. That was a term that they start using in the latter 1600s. And if you were white, it meant you could not be enslaved. Now, I wrote this little booklet about this, about race and labor, which people can access, and it's free. You can go to the Washington State Labor Council and get it online. That gives you some of this background. There's also some fantastic books. One book called The Many-Headed Hydra, Hydra, which you also can get a free PDF if you look it up. I didn't write that. Some other people wrote it. But basically, you had these laboring people that are joining together, and the rich had to figure out a way to divide them up. And they start using race, and race wasn't just simply an idea. What they do is that they create different conditions of life. It's what's called a differential in treatment. So in one case, it's that if you are declared to be Black, which meant that no matter how light-skinned you were, if there was some proof that you had some African blood, you were classified as Black, you could be enslaved. If you were classified as white, you could not be enslaved. Then what the British did is that they basically say to the poorest of the white people, they said, your interests lie with us rich white people. And so we will treat you well as long as you don't help the Indians and don't help the Africans. And in fact, we will allow you to own guns. And you can use those guns. You can kill the Indians, you can kill the Black folks, and nothing's going to happen to you. Just can't kill other white people. So this issue of gun ownership isn't about the Second Amendment. It's about slavery, and it's about killing Indians.
What you're speaking on now, a lot of people aren't aware of if they haven't done the homework on slavery. What you're speaking on is the overseer, right? You're speaking on the poor white guys who lived in the same township, and often as a family business might have run a couple of different plantations and been the overseers on a few plantations, right? And also the first police in this country, right? They would go out and capture runaway slaves and be the ones to instill the fear.
That's right. That's right. They in concentration camps in Nazi Germany, the term was capos. And they would identify certain prisoners who were given a certain privileged relationship over the others, and they had to manage on behalf of the Nazis the prisoners, right? Now they would die too. They just die a little bit later, right? And that's something that it's really important for white people to understand, white workers, that there is no one looking out for you. There's no rich white people that are looking out for you. They think you're suckers. They think you're stupid. They think you're dumb. They think you're twerps. And they think that all that is of value is your labor power. And they laugh at you every day because instead of you understanding who your enemy is, you think it's a Black guy or a Latino, right? Now, if you want me to come back on some show and we can talk about this in some level of detail, man, about the history, because it is fascinating. Because once you get it, it's like, oh, wow, we've been playing for suckers for 500 years.
I would love to have that. I would love to have that conversation with you. Maybe in February, if you want to come on our last week of February or something like that.
Just get back to me, man. Let's just play with a date. I'm ready.
We have about 10 more minutes. What economic function from Ian McShay? What economic function do owners and bosses provide that workers cannot? This is something that you and Mike is smiling up there.
Yeah.
He wants to answer too.
Oh yeah, no, that's an easy one. Nothing. Right? I mean, the bottom line is that, it's really interesting because I want to go deeper than what's being raised here, but it's a really good question. One of the things that we often think about in this country is that the rich, they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and that's how they became rich. No, it doesn't work that way. In fact, most of the rich people are born as a result of being in rich families. It's generational. There's not a whole lot of vertical rising. there's a lot of horizontal people moving from job to job, more or less within the same income bracket and in the same class. And so what bosses do, the owners are the ones that have the wealth. They've accumulated the wealth. And how did they accumulate the wealth? Well, then you have to look back at the beginnings of this country. The accumulation of wealth was like little things like stealing it from the Indians, right? Or engaging in piracy. You know, the Queen Elizabeth I of England commissioned these criminals, pirates, and they gave them a different name called privateers. So as long as they split the loot with Queen Elizabeth, everything was hunky-dory. And these people started tossing the wealth or transmitting the wealth from one generation to another. So the owners, to a great extent, accumulated wealth, often through phenomenal criminality. Many of the people that were involved in bootlegging in the 1920s, then after Prohibition ended, they were able to use their wealth, and all of a sudden they went legit. The supervisors are there to control the workers. We would often like to believe that supervisors exist in order to educate the workers. And obviously in some cases they do. But the main function in the production process is to oversee the workers and to disempower the workers. Because at the point the workers start realizing, damn, we don't need these suckers. We can do this ourselves. That is what capital is worried about.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love the historical perspective, and that's certainly where my mind goes whenever these big political questions are brought up. I think it's key to have that materialist understanding of history and try to wash out all the ideology out of our heads, which is something that I've battled with. I was crazy enough to join the military, and so if you're going to join the military, you're essentially just awash in ideology and broken understandings of history. And so that's something that we all have to come to terms with as veterans across the community. And so that's really helpful. And I think it really speaks to, we have a libertarian trend, I love y'all, whatever, you can be comrades, but these libertarians, they have to understand that this focus on capitalism and their weird understandings of history are just really broken. But we're here for you, and read that book, The Many-Headed Hydra. That looks like a fantastic book that you recommend.
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah.
And I love my libertarians too, right? But see, their views are based on a complete myth, right? Which is the idea that we don't need government, that sort of we can do it ourselves. And the problem is that history demonstrates that is not true, right? So for example, after World War II, there was a GI Bill. And it's been very well documented that the GI Bill was central to raising millions of workers, particularly white workers, out of poverty, giving people an opportunity to buy homes. That wasn't like pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. That was a government program, right? And it was a government program that, as it turns out, was racially biased in its implementation. That particularly African Americans were frequently blocked out of being able to access the GI Bill. There's other instruments that have been used throughout time by government that have advanced people's living standard. The Tennessee Valley Authority, one of the most important developments in that region, a very poor region. That didn't happen because people started putting their pennies together. It wasn't like a lot of poor white people got together and said, damn, we need this Tennessee Valley Authority. It's like that was government. So the libertarian thing is a myth. And see, if you want to test it, let's get rid of inheritance. And then let's see what happens.
to speak to that, you have hit on so many points today. It's remarkable. The generational wealth, the Tennessee Valley land, like when the Great Western Frontier.
That's right.
Exactly, you know what I'm saying? Speak on that, please, because that connects to exactly what you're just talking about. It's generational wealth right there.
Well, okay, so we talk about the Western frontier. The Western frontier was seized from people that were there. It wasn't like there was vacant land. It's not like we're talking about Antarctica or something, right? Or the middle of the Sahara Desert. We're talking about where people were living. And I shouldn't even say middle of the Sahara Desert because there's people living there. And so government, through this instrument that we're all familiar with called the US military, went into the West and seized it from the people that were living there or seized it from Mexico. That's government intervention. I mean, it's like if the libertarian view was accurate, then we'd be talking about an entirely different country. But it's not. It's fraudulent. The Homestead Act of 1862, which opened up land, who did that? I mean, how did that happen? I mean, it wasn't vacant land. It's like if you watch too many of the wrong Westerns, like you watch something like Shane or something, you'd think that, wow, this is like a beautiful country and there was like nobody there until white people emerged on their horses and buggies. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. It didn't quite work out that way. There were people there, in many cases, with very advanced civilizations that were driven out, destroyed, murdered. We got a lot to account for in this country. And one of the things, and this is not about guilt, it's about justice. It's about repairing the damage that you've done. If I went into somebody's house and I started throwing eggs around the house at the walls, and I started using the bathroom and not flushing the toilet, and I started smoking cigars and dropping my ash, people would say, well, Bill, you got to repair the damage. And it's like you don't just simply walk out of the house and say, I'll never do it again. It's like you created damage. Personal responsibility, folks. You screw up, you got to repair. But see, in this country, that goes back to what I was saying before, Mike, that we are the country that people they actively oppose history. But they embrace myth. It's not ideology. They embrace myth. It's what people want to believe to be the case, right? As opposed to let's deal with the reality. Let me give you another example. It's about immigration. So I've dealt with a number of people of European descent who, they're really upset about so-called illegals, right? Undocumented migrants. They say, my relatives came here legally, so y'all should stand in line. Okay. All right, that's interesting. Now, one of the questions to ask anybody that says this is, did your ancestors come here before 1924? And if the answer is yes, then I got a secret, and I'm just going to tell the two of you, so you can't tell anybody else, all right? If you came here before 1924, the only criteria to get into the country and ultimately become a citizen was that you weren't Chinese, you weren't insane, and you weren't infirm. That is it. Now, I want to say to all these good people of European descent, if that was good enough for your ancestors, why isn't it good enough for other people? Leave out the Chinese exclusion. If it was about not being insane and not being infirm, if that was a criteria that your relatives coming here from Poland, Sicily, Spain, Norway could use, why isn't it good enough for someone from Venezuela or Mexico or the Philippines? What's different? And then what happened in 1924? Well, what happened in 1924 is that after World War I, there was a very, very xenophobic movement against immigrants. It wasn't just about immigrants of color, by the way, because a lot of people of European descent don't want to admit that when their ancestors came here, they weren't white people. They were Europeans, but they weren't white people. So they had to prove that they were white. Well, what happened was there was a real anti-immigrant thing that went down, and the Ku Klux Klan, which became very large, helped to lead a movement to change the immigration laws. And in 1924, they passed an immigration act that put real strict racial provisions on who could come here, which is one of the reasons that so few Jews were allowed to come in the United States, even though the government knew exactly what Hitler was doing, right? But they were denied entry because it violated the law, right? And it was only after World War II that the laws started to change in terms of immigration, ultimately 1965. So for all those good white people to say, my ancestors came here legally, then tell me when your ancestors got here. And if they came before 1924, then shut the hell up, right? And go join the immigrant rights movement and say to the immigrant rights movement, if my relatives came here legally, right, for this criteria that was so simple, then your relatives from Mexico, from the Dominican Republic, from Haiti, etc., should be treated exactly the same way. But you know, and I know, there are a whole lot of people that aren't going to really go for that. But that's why I say, let's deal with history, not the myth. Let's not go for the okie doke. Let's deal with the reality. And that's why I say, if you're a fascist, just admit it. Just tell me, I'm a fascist. I want to exterminate y'all. Don't give me any bullshit, right? Just lay it out on the table so we know exactly what we're dealing with.
I love it, Bill. I wish we had a parental advisory, explicit content disclaimer to throw up. I wish we had thrown that up at the beginning for all you family, for all you folks watching this at the dinner table with your kids. You know, we love you. Sometimes people curse, but he's cursing. He's not cussing. He's not taking the Lord's name in vain. If you look at it technically, he's just saying expletive. He's just expressing himself. And so you can do that. He's giving you loving truth. So don't be offended. Don't turn your radios off. Don't close your ears. You know, Bill, thank you, man. I wanted to ask one more question and I kind of lost track of it. It was yeah, just say it, just call it out if that's what you are. You know, if the argument is even that you came here legally, if that your parents or your grandparents came here legally and they worked hard and they worked for everything you have, they knew, or you know, that they came to a stolen house. It's like if you go to a house party in your neighborhood, there's a nice house in the neighborhood and some kids, while the owners are away, or actually the owners aren't away, some kids go into the house and kill the owners and then turn it into their house and then start throwing block parties for the neighborhood. That's kind of what we have here. That's what that's what you've described. And I love that, you know. I just kind of like added on to a little bit. No,
go for it. And that's why we've got to repair the damage. You mess up that house, you repair the damage. You are responsible for the family that lives in that house dying of starvation, you deal with it. You expelled the family, you deal with it. You don't play a game of saying, well, it actually didn't happen, right? Because if you're going to do that, then don't tell me anything about personal responsibility. Don't run that BS on me. Again, if you're a fascist, just simply admit it. We can deal with that.
I am really thankful again for this interaction, and I look forward to the next time we have you on. I'm going to call you. I'll give you a call tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Mike, what do you want to say?
No, thank you for being here, Bill. Your voice is certainly the type of voice that we want on our show, and I think it's important that veterans hear your perspective because, the empire is decaying every day. I think Joe Biden's victory isn't necessarily. It's a good thing. It will benefit some people. It gives us a little glimmer of hope. But there's a lot of work to be done, and certainly white supremacy is still the glaring issue of this country that has to be dealt with, and we need to have these kind of conversations to come to terms with it. So, man, I don't know. Is there anything else that you would want maybe the veteran community as a whole to know, or something to take away, to think about? Until
yeah, I want veterans. I got to make this my final point because I actually have to get off. But I really am hoping that veterans are organizing other veterans and talking with them about who the real enemy is, and not letting them get suckered. Because I realize that because of how badly most veterans are treated, they're looking for answers, looking to figure out, well, who's responsible for this? And we've got to tell them, right? And we need veterans, right? And we need veterans to both be doing a number of things, to talk with other veterans, but also to be demanding changes in the Veteran Affairs Department. We need to really make it clear that when people put their lives on the line, whether they see combat or not, that they are owed something by this society. They're not garbage. They're not something to be dispensed with. And so we desperately need you guys and other progressive veterans talking with your colleagues about how they're feeling and about what they're going to do, because we need them. This movement needs them.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill Fletcher, for joining us today. Have a great day.
All right. Y'all take care. And thanks for having me on.
All right.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Pleasure. Bye-bye now.
Yo, I want to thank everybody in the chat room for staying lively, for keeping it going back and forth. We see your comments. We'll get to them this week at some point. Stephen Kreiser, I see that you said you're a libertarian at some point. It's interesting how it goes back and forth, like the things intersect and interact and overlap. And but thank you for coming here and taking part in this discussion. We welcome you. We welcome your comments, and you get feedback from other people in the chat room. That's the only way any of us grow, is through discussion and conversation, through open conversation. You can't grow without conversation. Even once you read a book and you take in information, you got to share it with somebody else, bounce it off somebody, and that's how it truly grows. That's how knowledge becomes wisdom. So I thank y'all for being here with us this week for another great week of Stand Down Live. We continue to be a resource for veterans and for active duty military. If you are seeking a way out of the military industrial complex and you need legal aid, please reach out. I'll just throw that in the banners as we leave, and I'll say peace and love, and I'll see y'all next week. Oh, thank you for doing that.
Peace.
Peace.